Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event, Next Gen Cloud 2020, Smarter Security for a Better Connected Government. Now, this is the first in an ongoing Oracle Government 360 series that examines how state and local governments are meeting the challenges of IT transformation as we start the new decade. This is Morgan Wright. I'm going to be your captain for this webinar today. I'm a senior fellow here at the Center for Digital Government. This is going to be fun. Been doing a lot of prep work with everybody. I know that you guys are going to enjoy this over the next 60 minutes. So joining me today, it's going to be our two featured speakers. We've got Jeff Cummings. He's the Business Systems Support Manager for the St. Paul, Minneapolis Public School System. And we've got William Sanders, a great Kansan and a Senior Manager with the U.S.-Canada Public Sector Technology in Oracle. Now, before we get started, you guys, I kind of laid out the agenda. So we just did some intro and housekeeping. Let's talk about some of the issues about migrating to the cloud. Then we're going to hear from Jeff, and we'll hear from William, and then we will go into Q&A. But look, I kind of want to set the stage because I know many of you, you think about migrating to the cloud, and your first thing is you start getting that look, on your face like this guy. You go, oh my gosh, are we going to be able to do this? Can we handle everything? Because there's quite a few things you have to think about. You've got to think about security, your perimeter security. Is it strong enough? Folks, you know and I know that one of the biggest threats facing state and local government and schools is ransomware, is breaches, privacy breaches. So how are you defending your perimeter? Well, then it goes beyond that. Then we start talking about natural disasters, disaster recovery. We've seen those awful things that are happening down in Australia. We've seen things happen in the United States between earthquakes and floods, right? So are you prepared for disaster recovery? What's your strategy around that? And then one of the jokes we used to tell when I was doing work inside the federal government, used to say yesterday's technology tomorrow. Are you folks using outdated and antiquated equipment? We're going to talk about a lot of this. But to talk about this, the first person we've got Jeff Cummings. Now, I'm going to introduce Jeff a little bit. I'm going to go to our first poll question, then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Jeff. So Jeff is the Business Systems Support Manager for the St. Paul, like we said, Public Schools. With over 22 years of PeopleSoft experience, he is responsible for the Oracle PeopleSoft solution for both infrastructure and applications. Before I tell you the rest about Jeff, let's go to our first poll question. So our first poll question is, we did some research, Oracle did, and they found out that 74% of enterprises say that business continuity and disaster recovery is an important cloud capability. So how do you folks in the audience today address your disaster recovery, your DR today? A, no DR for some mission critical systems. B, you're using tape or server backup but on premises. C, you're using tape or server backup but off premises. Or D, you have a cloud-based backup. So let me tell you a little bit about Jeff as you guys vote on this, and then we'll read out the results. So prior to joining the school district, he was employed for nearly 14 years in the commercial healthcare field. So he's cut his teeth on tough issues, as you can see, on IT issues. He was a system analyst at Alena Hospitals and Clinics in Minneapolis. So let's kind of bring everything together now. So let's take a look at this, and it shows that about 3% say you have no DR for some of your mission critical systems. It looks like some of you, quite a few of you, say tape or server backup on premises, but it looks like the biggest chunk of you say you use tape or server backup off premises, and about a quarter of you say cloud-based backup. So I think that's some pretty interesting stuff. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff's going to give you some ideas about what they're doing in the school system, and then him and I are going to have a quick discussion. I'm going to walk him through some of the successes they've had, some of the challenges they've had, and we're going to get some additional insight. So Jeff, I turn this over to you. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Morgan, and thanks to everyone that's on. A little background about St. Paul Public Schools. We're the second largest K-12 school district in Minnesota. We have around 37,000 students and employ around 7,000 employees. We're a very diverse district here. That said, we offer a number of specialized services to meet these needs. Our existing IT environment. PeopleSoft is our solution for HR, payroll, benefits, and our financial systems. Our PeopleSoft application was sitting on-prem in our data center. We had both production and non-production, as well as backups that were spread across 24 servers, all of them at least 2 years out of warranty. So obviously we had a big problem. To replace these servers, it would have been a huge expense to our district. In addition, we were paying for multiple licenses and support across all of these servers. So my team originally was designed to be the PeopleSoft application support, not the IT infrastructure support. Our IT department was in a position where they could no longer support our infrastructure. So I was asked to come up with a solution to the problem. So, Morgan?
Yeah, hey, and this is so, Jeff. When you and I talked earlier, and you had some great information. I saw one of your presentations you did at one of the Oracle big conventions, and it really got me thinking about. Okay, so when you started this whole project, you obviously had some huge challenges, and one of the things, like I said, is occupying a big portion of the news right now. We're looking at everything from the coronavirus to the fires in Australia, but disaster recovery has become a big issue. So let's talk a little bit about some of your challenges you had with system outages and the fact that there was no off-site disaster recovery.
Right. So what we were experiencing were power failures. We had servers dropping at any given time. We had to contact our IT department to resolve these issues. It could take hours or days in some instances, and this affected 400 to 500 of our super users trying to access PeopleSoft to do their daily job. We also didn't have any off-site disaster recovery plan. Some of the key reasons, all of the backups were done on-prem in our data center, and then we never had any documentation for disaster recovery.
Wow, and I remember doing a lot of work with the federal government down in certain countries, and their backups were in the same room as the servers that they were backing up. So it's like if one thing went down, everything went down. But you had more than just the system outage problem too, right? It was also the issue is obviously anybody who's used hardware and especially software, at some point you have to update stuff. So what were some of your big challenges around just updating this huge, massive amount of technology that you were responsible for?
Right. Well, since we were at the end of our vendor support with our servers, there were no patches available. In addition, we had inconsistent between our systems, production versus non-production, so they were all running at different levels of patches, and so we also had no control over the application infrastructure. This was all managed by our IT department.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because one of the challenges is, as and I know with teachers and education, there's a lot of great ideas coming out, new ways to serve students, serve the community. So as you develop new applications, as you develop new things, what were some of the biggest headaches that you had found in terms of having that limited control of the application infrastructure? What problems did it cause for your users, and what problems did it cause for your team to be able to manage this?
Well, one of the biggest problems is if our system went down and we're in the middle of our payroll cycle, we had to contact our IT department, which may or may not respond as quick as we would need, which could have potentially held up our payroll from getting processed, on time and out to the employees.
Well, and everybody wants to get paid, right? So, that was obviously a huge issue that you needed to deal with. But let's talk about it, because you mentioned something a little bit earlier too, and let's tie it into this. You talked about some of your software, your hardware was end of life. It wasn't being supported by the companies anymore. There were no patches available. So tell me about some of the challenges, the headaches you had with the servers, because now you've got hardware and now you've got an outdated architecture. What were the big problems that presented themselves that you realized you needed to address when it came to servers and outdated architecture?
Well, like I said earlier, all 24 servers that we were running were at least 2 years out of warranty. So we're basically hanging by a thread, knowing if they're going to stay up or not. We did have some that would go down. Most of them are our non-prod environments, but we're hanging by a thread if it was going to be our production environment.
Well, and that's the key thing too, because what would have happened? I mean, speaking of disaster recovery, what would have happened if 1 or 2 servers had gone down because of failures? How would that have impacted your ability to deliver services to the school, to the teachers, to your users?
That could have been a big impact, primarily with our payroll system. If we weren't able to pay people in a timely manner, we probably would have had to revert back to the previous payroll and paid everybody what they were last paid while we were trying to resolve the problem.
Yeah, and then that obviously just adds a cascading series of work and workflows and additional work that has to be done, and nobody wants to go revert back to paper and stuff. But
correct.
Anytime you've got servers, you've got software, you also deal with licenses. And I know sometimes it's like we've got a license here, we've got a license there. It's like whack-a-mole. Licenses are popping up all over the place. So what was the big issue around managing licenses in this very diverse, very kind of fragmented infrastructure and architecture that you had?
Well, we were using Microsoft Windows Server, Red Hat Enterprise, Linux. Not all of our servers were on the same operating systems. The licenses were all at all different levels of expiration, and just trying to manage all of that via our IT department, which again, they were the ones responsible for that. My team really had limited control with that.
Well, Jeff, let's talk about that for a second, because the other thing, too, is it seems like rather than being able to focus on your mission of delivering services and things you want to do, you almost kind of took on a lot of administrative roles, it sounds like, with a lot of the stuff that you're doing, right, just to support the IT department. Is that a fair statement?
Well, that would be a fair statement with regards to the PeopleSoft and Oracle solution, right.
Right, and so we're really starting to see that this impact is growing bigger, right? And then, like you say, you just mentioned Windows, you mentioned Red Hat. So now we've got different operating systems, and anytime you do that, I know from experience, and it shows right here, there's a lack of standardization. So anytime you have that, it really creates complexity in trying to manage this and solve problems. So tell me about these complexity issues and these management problems you had when you had all of these different OSs running across your enterprise.
Right. So we would have server that would drop. We'd have to figure out what operating system it's running on, then bringing it back up. Are we still compliant with that? And it became a challenge.
Yeah, and like you say, part of the problem was you almost had to become a detective. You had to spend a lot of time investigating the problem before you could start solving the problem, right? That added a lot of time to fixing whatever problem there was, right?
Correct. Yeah, I became basically the IT department, which originally we weren't designed to be.
Right. So, well, and folks right now that if you're listening, they might think, oh, man, that sounds bad, right? But it's not all bad because there's something else that came forward. So let's talk about some of the solutions. Let's talk about some of the things you did. What was your big bottle of aspirin that you used, to alleviate this headache? So let's talk about the first one. You talk about standardizing on cloud architecture. So tell us about this enabled hybrid solution and setting the stage for moving your production from where it was on-prem or kind of that area, moving it to the cloud. So let's talk about your standardization on the cloud architecture.
Sure. So what I ended up doing, I was tasked with coming up with a solution to this. So I reached out to Oracle and to Collier IT, which is our managed service provider, to come up with the best fit for St. Paul. The cloud was new to us, but I wanted to move St. Paul into that direction because I saw that was the future of IT. So we were required to keep our production environment on-prem, though. So that was one of our stumbling blocks that we had to accommodate. So Oracle came back with a hybrid approach. We moved our non-prod environments to the cloud. We stood up our production DR in the cloud, and then we ended up buying an Oracle database appliance for our on-prem solution for production.
Just that one step alone, how much did it alleviate this headache that you were initially dealing with when you were able to just standardize?
Well, it alleviated the headache of knowing that we had 24 outdated servers sitting out there that could fail at any time. So we've reduced our footprint down dramatically by that. And then knowing that we were using Oracle as our partner with this, it just gave me a lot more confidence that we would have a stable system.
Yeah, it enabled you to have a good weekend without worrying about the phones ringing because which one of my 24 servers went down. So that's
exactly
a good plus there. Right, so let's go now, because the other thing we're looking at, too, is that, we know this kind of gets to the challenge, too, of the workforce. We have been traditionally in state and local government challenged to hire all the people we need and to keep and retain the talent. And we know the private sector is getting a lot more than the public sector is. So when we start thinking about workforce and we start thinking about how do we create more autonomous things, we've got to, I think you were saying, we've got to get out of doing admin work and get back to the operational work that, we were designed to do. So let's talk about part of the solution. You say it was a more autonomous environment, and you especially talk about how the staff was focused on business process. Go into a little bit more depth on that about what that means.
So my team is designed more to deal with the PeopleSoft solution and application and not with the infrastructure. So by moving this all up into Oracle Cloud and on Oracle Database and using a managed service provider, I was able to augment that part off. So I didn't have a need to hire a DBA, which saved me some money. And then it gave my team more time to free up, not worrying about the hardware aspect of it, but more on the software aspect.
Yeah, let's just dive into that real quick. You said it enabled you to not have to hire a DBA. Had you had to go out and hire a DBA and write the requirements, and do the selection process, how long realistically do you think it would have taken you to find a DBA to be able to help you in your environment?
That's a good question. I would say months. Also, being public sector versus private sector, you have a compensation difference there as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, right? So it's really challenged. So to become more autonomous, I mean, it's not that you don't want to hire people. It's that it's really tough to hire in this. So if we can do automation and things that enable us to do more things with fewer people, I mean, that's just the new normal. But speaking of the new normal, let's talk a little bit about your cloud database backup, because your database is one of your most valuable things, right? So from a
Correct.
disaster recovery standpoint, and you needed the offsite, like you say, to complement your on-prem. Talk about your strategy between that, because on one sense you have cloud, but on the other sense you've still got some things on premises. It sounds like because you needed that kind of access and control. So tell us about your approach on that, your strategy on that.
So what we wanted to do with our DR system, since number one, we didn't have one, we created it all from new. We do multiple backups. We do backups on our on-prem ODA, as well as send backups to our cloud for production. And they're real time, so anything we do on-prem in production is automatically updated and backed up on our cloud solution.
Okay, and just from that standpoint alone, the ability, like you said, I think earlier, to do a hybrid thing, that sounds like it was something that was really helps you because of your environment, right? So it wasn't more this expensive custom solution as it was a custom fit, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we did have quite a bit of cost reduction by going with the hybrid solution.
And I think we'll hit upon that in just a minute, too. So let's talk about, too, because partnerships are always key in doing something like this, right? It's very difficult, like you say, for you to have all the people you need to do this. So at one point, you needed to partner with somebody. So let's talk about your managed service provider. It was Collier IT. And let's talk about some of the things that they did to help you in terms of deploying this hybrid solution.
Sure. They came into play from the aspect we needed a company to both purchase the Oracle database appliance and our cloud solution, and to partner with us in setting it all up. Since I'm running a team of 4 of us here, we obviously didn't have the resources to set up a brand new cloud environment and on-prem solution. So having Collier as our managed service provider, it freed up my team to get back to managing the PeopleSoft application. And now Collier manages all of our infrastructure and our Oracle database. So we also have standardized our change management process, which we didn't have any standardization with that in the past. When we apply a patch, we do it to all, both production on-prem and to all the non-prod environments in the cloud. And this keeps all of our systems in sync, which in the past we didn't have that.
So it sounds like life is just a little bit easier for you, and you might be able to enjoy the Super Bowl even though the Vikings aren't playing, right?
Correct. Yeah, it did make life a lot easier, not having to worry about all those servers sitting there and, is the power going to stay on, or are they going to fail, or...
Right. Well, look, so we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the solutions, and I know a lot of people in the audience, a lot of times it does get down to, hey, I like it, love it, looks like it works. Tell me about now the money you save. Let's talk about some of the savings. Let's talk about some of the financial impact it had for you. So let's start talking. I mean, I see this number about licensing, 50%. That seems like an unreal number.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But by eliminating 24 servers down to 2, which the 2 is the on-prem Oracle database appliance, we've cut our costs by about 50%. And so this is a combination of both Oracle and our PeopleSoft licensing, because we're not paying for the size of the servers that we had. We've reduced that size down, so obviously our licensing costs have dropped accordingly.
Yeah, and you mentioned, too, the DBA and the staffing, right? So it sounds like you've been able to still accomplish the same thing, but by reducing your staffing costs, which we always know human capital is one of the biggest costs inside public sector, but you achieved a 25% reduction in staffing costs.
Yep. Even with not hiring a DBA and hiring an MSP, we still experienced about 25%. Now I also have 24/7, 365 availability, and I don't have to worry about covering a DBA when they're on vacation or if they're out sick or whatnot. Collier's there to handle that, and they respond instantly. So if they identify a system problem, or if they get an alert on any of the systems via the cloud or on-prem, they're contacting me by phone or email or whatever the need is, but they're always there right when I need them.
Yeah, and now tell us about your facility footprint, because we know space is at a premium, and anytime you've got more things running, it's also more energy, right? But you reduced, again, another huge number. You've reduced your facility footprint by 75%.
Right.
Where did that come from?
Well, that was based on standard costs of a rack to house servers, air conditioning, electricity, all the extra pieces that go along with managing 24 servers, and I believe they were sitting in probably 6 or 7 different racks. So they weren't even standardized in the rack layouts. They were spread out across multiple racks within our data center. So you're dealing with all the electrical costs and whatnot. So that was determined by Collier. That's how much we reduced our costs by just going down to one Oracle database appliance, physical hardware, and pay the rack cost for that.
Wow, and then let's finish up with the hardware acquisition. You said also it reduced, I assume because of you reducing the number of things, you've reduced your acquisition cost 75% too, right?
That's correct. Yeah, 24 servers down to 2.
Yeah. And like you mentioned too, your hardware, software maintenance, it all, even by shifting it to your managed service provider, you guys were still able to save staffing money. So let's finish up with this because we're coming to the end of our segment here, but I liked a couple of the quotes you had. So give us your takeaway from this. I mean, this is some of your team, so let's close out with a couple of your takeaways from this whole project.
So one of the biggest takeaways we've seen, it took about 8 hours to refresh an environment on our old servers. And again, that was working with our IT department, so it could be even longer than that, depending on their availability. Now we can do it, and my own team can do it within 2 to 3 hours without any outside support. We can just do it all ourselves. The other thing I noticed, and this was my personal comment, was the response time in the cloud is as fast, if not faster, than our on-prem ODA server. And that alone was a big plus for me to be able to see that, because that proves to me that the decision I made to move us to the cloud was the right decision.
Hey, and we've had a couple folks ask about acronyms, so would you just tell us real quick what the ODA server stood for?
Sure, that's Oracle Database Appliance. So that is our on-prem physical server that we have here in our building.
Wow, cool. Well, hey, look, this has been really great, Jeff. You guys have a great story, by the way. I'm glad you did that because my sister and brother-in-law all live up in your area as we talk. So, hey, congrats, and enjoy the Super Bowl this weekend. No Vikings, but, hey, we'll see what we can do next time for you. So thanks, Jeff.
Martin.
Hey, guess what, folks? You bet. Now, this is going to be the fun part. Now I get to introduce a fellow Kansan. That's where I'm originally from, William Sanders. Now, William is the Director of U.S. and Canada Technology Strategy for Oracle Public Sector. Before I tell you the rest about his distinguished background, let me get into our next poll question. So the next poll question we have is, what is your biggest IT infrastructure challenge? Is it staffing and resources? Is it outdated technology? Is it ongoing system maintenance? Is it something other, or do you not have any problems in your IT infrastructure? So let me finish telling you a little bit, while you folks are voting, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about William. So like I said, he's got an extensive background in state government, serving for 4 years as Deputy Chief of Staff to Kansas Governor Bill Graves and 4 years as the Kansas Labor Agency CIO Operations Chief and Employment Security Director. He has spent the past 17 years in the private sector helping government agencies modernize service delivery to improve constituent outcomes. And even though he went to KU and is a Jayhawk, I still like him, so I think he's done good. So let's see what some of the results were. So, boy, look at this. It looks like staffing and resources. I probably could have predicted this, but we know staffing is always going to be a huge challenge. How do we apply technology to solve that? B is outdated technology, goes back to what Jeff was just telling you about. And C, 22% say ongoing system maintenance. 11% say other, and 5 people, they are living a great life because they don't have any of those challenges. But I think, William, this really informs a lot of what I think you're going to talk about. So let me turn this over to you. The floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Morgan. And Rock Chalk Jayhawk, go Chiefs. So let me talk a little
right
bit.
On.
The typical government agency challenges. We tend to see, 3 key challenges when it comes to developing and maintaining core IT systems. Staffing and resources, outdated technology, and system maintenance being too time-consuming. With regard to staffing and resources, it's a problem in government because rarely are the pay and benefits package like you guys were talking about and the opportunities for training, truly competitive with what's offered by the private sector. So you couple that with an aging workforce, in which you end up with is, loss of key personnel through attrition. And then so, in government, we end up having a hard time attracting and maintaining a skilled workforce. And that problem should sound pretty familiar to most folks on the phone. We also struggle to keep pace in terms of, staying current with the skill sets. Many of the systems we currently maintain are based on, programming languages that end up not being taught in school any longer. So that tends to be a big challenge for us. And if that weren't enough, we struggle to keep our technology current. Mainframes and COBOL and JCL continue to proliferate some of our mission-critical systems. We've got tight budgets making it difficult to replace outdated technology and do so on the appropriate schedule. And, and Jeff was talking about that. It's especially true with hardware. We've got, servers that are out of warranty, or we find it difficult to afford the cost to replace them. We struggle to keep pace with licensing and support costs across our systems. And then when we do keep pace with costs, we struggle to have enough resources to stay current with updates, patches, upgrades, fixes. Our systems end up becoming disconnected from lifecycle management, and then they become a risk for continuity of operations. All the sort of things that you and Jeff were talking about, Morgan, just a minute ago. And it's not just that. Right, it's that system maintenance can be nothing short of a complex nightmare. Lack of standardization on operating systems or databases and programming languages creates a really confusing mix of platforms and technologies. It's just difficult to integrate and maintain. Inconsistent patch levels between systems, means that it's hard to get systems to work together properly. So in our conversations with customers, we frequently find that patches and updates are years behind schedule. So why is that? Well, partially it's because customers are afraid an update might break something critical, and they struggle to fix it when it breaks. So I had that problem when I was working in Kansas, and the failure to patch exposes your system to additional vulnerabilities. Most security breaches actually occur even though the patch was available. It just wasn't applied. So that's really key. The vendors are doing a bit of their part, but it's hard for us to keep pace and apply the patches. System maintenance is another one is, and you don't want to really get me going too much on this, but on provisioning new environments. It's time consuming, it's tedious, it's prone to inconsistency, which we will sometimes call configuration drift. And what does that mean? What it means is you've got faulty testing, you've got difficulty promoting code through the environments, you've got difficulty replicating production for staging environments and DR environments. You spend less time on developing new functionality for your core mission activities than you ought to. And most importantly, you end up with an inability to make changes that the lines of business desire or the legislature or the city council or county boards demand. So a lot of things that end up being a bit of a challenge. And it's not just that we have challenges. It's that the challenges are difficult to solve. Really smart people in government and in their contractors and their vendors, struggle with these challenges every day. So the question is really, what makes these challenges so hard to fix? And with regard to staffing and resources, you can't just hire your way out of staffing and resource challenges. It's not just that you need more people, but you need the right ones. And current technology is changing more rapidly than our staff typically are able to adapt. So, and you've got younger workers who want access to the most current technology, but the most current technology typically isn't what government has in production. So you've got a chasm there to bridge. Outdated technology creates security risks, and those risks grow, exponentially really each year. In the past, the most common way to deal with those threats was perimeter-based security, aka firewalls. We would be able to put in a firewall because most people were at their desks. That's where they accessed the systems. So firewalls were an effective defense. But that just doesn't fly any longer. In fact, now we're finding that organizations need perimeter-based security controls. That's out, and that's because workers have access on their mobile devices, whether that's a phone or a laptop or a tablet, and there's a proliferation of self-service. So workers can access the system from anywhere, and government's got to change to a more defense-in-depth strategy that also encompasses autonomous monitoring and autonomous management. So they've got more layers of defense than simply having a firewall around the perimeter. And I said a little bit earlier that system maintenance could be really nothing short of a complex nightmare. And it's partially because maintaining that older hardware and code can be prohibitively expensive. Keeping up with the refresh and the replacement cycle also can be difficult. And then we find that, sometimes when we do keep pace, we're not doing anything to future-proof the organization and help break the cycle or the replacement cycle into something, that's more efficient and more effective. And we end up getting caught in the trap of tending to the past and ignoring our future. So those are some of the reasons why, not just we have challenges, but our challenges end up being fairly difficult to solve. And cloud customers, are responding to these challenges and the difficulty in solving them by, especially in government, by investing more and more in cloud computing. We're moving and improving workloads to the cloud. We're making use of cloud tooling. We're subscribing to cloud applications in ever-increasing numbers. The experience, though, is still, leaving customers, wanting more. So what are some of the more things that customers want? Well, one thing they want is a true elastic cloud. They don't want to be tied down to shapes and sizes, often having to over-provision to get the performance they need. And that would be an approach that's very similar to what they had to do on premises, which is because you're limited by the box that you've got, you're going to say, okay, well, I need to make sure that I've got more servers than I am going to be able to max out, and so I'm over-provisioning. Well, you don't want to do that same strategy and do that in the cloud. It doesn't make any sense. What customers want is only to pay for what they need when they need it. They want to have the ability to scale up and down in response to current workloads without downtime, and then do that seamlessly and autonomously. So ideally, everything would be serverless, meaning that customers would receive services not tied to shapes and sizes or hardware per se, but instead with the flexibility that comes with auto-scaling. And that would be coupled with high availability, fault tolerance, and require zero maintenance. That's where customers are really wanting to go. They also want security made easy. They want secure systems without all of the complexity that comes from running a business on premises and in the cloud. And it's more than just physical and cybersecurity. It's about knowing, hey, look, there's an actionable plan for the continuity of operations in the event of a disaster. And it's just what St. Paul Public Schools planned for and what Jeff was talking about. And then finally, customers want the cloud to help them be able to focus in on the core mission rather than, administrative and maintenance activities. So that means that, hey, we want to be able to be proactive, not reactive. We want to be able to make data-driven decisions, not anecdotal ones. And we want the cloud to help us close the gap between the resources that we've got and the resources that we need. Let some automation and let some new technology help us move forward and drive better outcomes for our constituents. So those are the top couple of things that we see cloud customers really asking for. The good news through all of this is that really all of the things that we just talked about can be achieved. For example, the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, it's a Generation 2 cloud, provides an autonomous infrastructure and platform, including things like autonomous database and autonomous Linux operating system. And the purpose of that autonomy is to eliminate human error, eliminate human emissions. And it's the autonomy really that's the differentiator between for a Gen 1 cloud, Gen 2 cloud, an Oracle cloud. Because what you're able to do then is just pay only for what you need at your base level of workload, and then use features to help you, like auto-scaling, provisioning, encryption, patching, updating, tuning, security monitoring, and remediation, those things that will help you keep current, eliminate human error, and eliminate human emissions. All that autonomy helps you be truly elastic. Then you're getting the best bang for the buck in cloud because you're only paying for what you need when you need it, and you're able to scale. Security is one of these things that people think about moving to cloud, and I think, well, am I really going to be secure there? And the fact is, cloud's more secure than ever. Gen 2 Cloud allows organizations to bake in better security than they've got in their own data centers, and cloud vendors are highly incented to continually focus on security. And if they don't do that, it's really their death sentence. Third-party security compliance audits with annual cycles are the norm, and they cover global programs like, let's say, ISO 27001 or 27017, 27018, government programs like FedRAMP or DoD, SRG impact levels, industry programs like HIPAA or PCI DSS, and then maybe even some regional programs like Canada's PIP EDA. So the cloud vendors are focusing on these continuous audits to make sure that their systems are secure. And, the question really is, are we otherwise on putting our systems through security testing like that? And no. And that's likely because, IT decision makers are challenged to prioritize work between a couple of different things. One is their operations. The second one is, modernization investments, new projects, and the like to respond to legislative and regulatory mandates, and then also constituent demands that are coming their way. And then the third thing is security. And the result of that ends up being security is often, just one of the least funded elements of state and local governments. So while it's very important, it tends to be sort of at the bottom of the funding tree. And it's a concern because data security threats, which, obviously is a concern for any organization, it's really even a greater concern in government because of the information we store. We've got things like social security numbers, birth certificates, driver's license information, bank account information, credit card information, addresses for millions and millions of people. So we've got data that the bad guys, as I'll call them, want. And many of the common reasons for data breaches are preventable. And those things are unencrypted data, security patches not being applied, administrator snooping, or poor network isolation, malware, and viruses. Almost all of these things, right, can be solved through the use of autonomous database. So a next generation cloud, those enhancements are going to enable users to strengthen pretty much all aspects of their security profile and build a stronger and more resilient overarching infrastructure using things like isolation, security zones, and a perimeter control. So the thought here is that clouds attack security with a defense-in-depth approach that employs layered controls. So if you've got a vulnerability that's discovered and exploited in one layer, another security control is waiting in the next layer. So threats don't enter and threats don't spread. And that's obviously very important given all of the very sensitive data that government collects and maintains. Most importantly, though, you've got a Generation 2 cloud is going to enable an organization to employ modern technologies, transformative technologies, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, automated analytics, and autonomous capabilities into their security approach. So what's that going to do? That's going to enable government to address threats in real time, making it possible to keep up with the attackers where humans simply couldn't do it. And you don't need data scientists to do this type of analysis like you might otherwise be thinking. You can do this simply by using Oracle tools, for example, because analysis functionality like forecasting or predictive analytics or trend analysis, that sort of stuff is built right in. So that's going to help you make decisions on when and where and how to apply your resources. The simple fact for all of this is that you can't simply hire your way out. The right investment for government is in autonomous capabilities and technologies. With regard to mission focus, because of the possibilities that we just talked about that come from autonomous technologies with artificial intelligence and machine learning built right in, governments are able to focus on the core mission rather than maintenance activities. And this means additional functionality to serve constituents and drive outcomes. And then you can achieve proactive data-driven decisions rather than reactive ones based on anecdotes. So a lot of concerns, a lot of reasons why those things are difficult to solve, but the fact is that the main concerns here are all achievable. You can make great improvements for the things that you're asking for in terms of elasticity, security, and being able to turn back in and focus on your mission. One thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about today was that Oracle recently announced an always free tier, so customers, both new and existing, like to say old friends and new ones, can do more than just, kick the tires of the Generation 2 cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or commonly called OCI. What you've got here is a free tier that includes some of Oracle's best technologies, like the autonomous database. And then through the software, you can get enough free services to see how well Oracle Cloud ends up working for you, because you've got the technologies in place there, the sort of things that you're going to want with autonomous database, for example, to go and see, hey, look, how well can this perform for us? So you can go to cloud.oracle.com and learn a little more about the things that can happen in a Generation 2 cloud. With that, I'll stop and go back to Morgan so we can open up for questions.
Hey, thanks. Hey, not bad for a KU grad. If you'd been to K-State, I would have helped you out. No, but hey, would have been William was, I'm sorry, folks. A little in-state rivalry here going on. So hey, no, look, but this is great stuff too. And William really went into a lot of depth on stuff, and because of what he and Jeff did, such a great presentation, we've got a lot of questions. So before I get to a lot of the questions, first of all, we want to do is, let you guys know is that you can learn more about Oracle Government 360. Just go to govtech.com/Oracle360 or go to oracle.com/state and local. You're going to get a lot of information there that's going to help you go beyond just this webinar and learn a lot of lessons from Jeff and William. So with that in mind, we also have a special thing because we were able to sneak in. He was vacationing in Hawaii, and we brought him back just for this webinar. So we were able to bring Dean Arardi in. He's the Solutions Engineering Director for Oracle Public Sector. So we're going to sneak Dean in here for a couple questions because we've got a couple that are up his alley. But the first one, this one's going to go to Jeff. And Jeff, this is a fun one because Teresa Nisler from Metropolitan Council has a question for you. But folks, the reason I mentioned her name is the reason Jeff is where he's at is because he was hired by Teresa. So this is his first boss asking him a question. So Jeff, make sure you get this right, okay? So she had a great question.
I'll try.
Do her proud, all right? So she goes, she asks, she says, how do you test the patches to ensure that they are successful if you're updating a testing, a development, and production? And that's a great question. All at the same time. How do you test them when you're updating everything at the same time?
Well, full transparency, we're not doing them all at the same time, but we're doing them within about a week window. Typically what we do with our patches is after our payroll cycle is completed, we have about a week and a half before our next cycle starts. So we're aggressively putting in first our dev, then we jump into our test environment. We run some test scripts against that, make sure the system's running stable, no problems, and then we make as a collective a decision to move it into production. That's where Collier steps in and they apply the patches. Typically those are done over the weekend, so if we do have an issue, we can roll back and life is good. And hi, Teresa, by the way.
That's good.
Thought I'd get that one in there.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a webinar where we've actually had the person who got hired in on the webinar, so this is really cool. So, hey, but this next one, like I said, the reason I snuck Dean in on this is, Dean, I've got a question for you now. So Jack Searle from Larimer County, and hopefully that's Wyoming, because that's a great state as well. He asked, Dean, he says, as a way to combat ransomware and protect citizen PII, personally identifiable information, what are your recommendations for encryptions on user devices? What have you found useful in an enterprise environment? And obviously, ransomware, Dean, is a huge issue right now for state and local government.
Sure. Yeah, it is, absolutely. And it is a very big topic. And the solution really is multifaceted. When you look at especially end user devices, the first thing, of course, which you'll see from anybody, regardless if it's Oracle or not, would be education of the end users, training the end users how to what to look out for, good practices, what to watch out for as far as their behavior or suspicious emails, etc. I say that first and foremost before anything else, of course. On top of that, things that can help, and if you think about it, ransomware doesn't occur because just one time. It's usually because they're trying lots of different things and multiple approaches. And this could be a webinar all in of itself, I would think, but there are things to consider, including multi-factor authentication, the encryption that you use. A couple of the points that William mentioned earlier as isolation and separation, but also when it comes down to user traffic and user behavior, activity monitoring, which is some of the things that we do within Oracle and our cloud hosting. And then, of course, having a secure and offline backup. And that would be something, if you look at ransomware technology and the way that they approach it, a lot of that ransomware is pretty smart. It's looking for those backups and archives. So if you've got something separated off, in a cloud, it's archived off, that's a much more protection as a last-ditch effort in case you had to recover yourself. Most of the cases that we've seen, even if you just read them online, I did some recently myself as well, where the problems ended up being because they couldn't recover, and so if you have a recovery strategy, you'll definitely be in a lot better shape than for some folks who don't have that.
No, and look, this is it's beyond just a problem; it's an epidemic. So that's some great insight and great advice. Hey, what I'm going to do, I'll mix this up a little bit. So Jeff, I've got a question coming up for you, but then I'm coming right back to Dean, you and William. I got one, so you guys stand by. So Jeff, kind of, one of the questions too is, what is your long-term strategy for your PeopleSoft migration? Where do you see this going, and where are you going to go with it?
Well, the plan, and this is my vision, we're just starting our 9.2 upgrade for PeopleSoft. We're going to do that completely in the cloud, and the end goal is to have all PeopleSoft, both production and non-production, running exclusively in Oracle Cloud. We'll keep our Oracle database appliance as a backup in the interim, but eventually the plan is just to go completely cloud-based.
Well, and that's, and obviously based on the things you talked about and the strategy you're doing, it sounds like that's very consistent, very good with your strategy. So what I want to do is I want to kind of play off of that. And this one I'm going to toss out to Dean, you, but William, I'd like you to add in your thoughts as well too. But we know what Jeff has done, but let's see what is Oracle seeing out there in the industry in terms of, is hybrid cloud typical in government? Or is everyone just heading to all cloud? Is it an all or nothing, or can it be both? So, Dean, let's start with you, and then William, you pitch in on it.
It's also a great question. I think if people had their druthers, if they could choose, they would move everything to the cloud if they could. But that's not how fast things move. That's not the reality of what our customers are living, which is why Oracle's strategy and the flexibility that you have in running some things on-prem and some things in the cloud and moving at your own pace and the pieces that you want, that is a huge advantage for our customers. And one thing that we get complimented on by our customers in terms of, I don't feel like you're coming in here and only selling me one thing and I have to move absolutely everything. That's not how they operate, right? So that flexibility is a big advantage for our customers. And like Jeff's experience, the advantage is Oracle also has the entire stack. We've got our hardware products and our on-prem products, and they're all the same technology as we have in the cloud. So it gives you that great flexibility and confidence, less vendors to have to work with, and I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's where people would love to go, and we're providing them that path in the way that they like. William, what do you think? Anything else?
Yeah, I think that's dead on. The thing I would add to that, Dean, is just that, it allows the customer to tailor their deployment model to match up with the use case. So they're therefore able to take advantage of the true promise of cloud. Is kind of, I look at it, it's like, because I'm not forced into a particular path, I can say, hey, like, for this particular use case, I want to have this workload on premise and I want to have this workload in the cloud. And then for this for particular use case, I want to mix it up a little bit. And because of that, they can take a cloud first or cloud smart mandate and do things in a way that makes the most sense for them in their situation, whether they have concerns around data residency or latency or whatever it may be. They can adjust based on their approach because the deployment model is going to support that.
Absolutely.
Great. Hey, and Jeff, I've got kind of Jeff, this next one's for you because I'm going to combine a couple questions because Lillian Chu from Los Angeles County has got a great question too. And I think it goes with a lot of questions that I'm seeing because it went back to your original statement about having Collier IT as a managed service partner. So the particular question Lillian had was, do you have to pay a higher service charge for having this 24/7 callback capability? But then you talked about having this managed service partner. So when you look at not only having the partner, and I think you said you actually saved money on some of this and kind of addressed Lillian's issue, did you pay a higher service charge? When you put all of this stuff together, how important was it to you to have this service partner? And how did you avoid or did you pay a higher service charge for having some of this capability?
So I'll answer the service charge part first. So when we negotiated the contract with Collier, the 24/7 service was already as part of the package that they offered. There was no additional costs that I had to pay to get that 24/7 support. How important was it to have Collier as a partner? Well, like I said earlier, I have a team of 4 of us total that manages both now application and infrastructure. They were a lifesaver. There was no way we could have done it, or St. Paul in the whole could have done this without them. They have the expertise, unbelievable expertise. They have data scientists, they have all sorts of levels of expertise that dealt with every level of challenge that we had moving from on-prem into the cloud, and they were able to answer and resolve every issue we've had up to this point.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of goes back to even things Dean and William were saying, but you're talking about in this day and age, in the era, especially of reduced workforce and, the staffing is challenged, you've got to find better ways to partner, and I think you were spot on with that. So let's actually, and let me, William, let's ask you this one first, and then I'd like Jeff and Dean to both, let's make this a three-part question here. So one of the people, when we talked about moving to the cloud is, what point do you know, it's kind of like what hair constitutes a beard. At what point do I know my workloads are ready for cloud? So, William, let's start off with you, and then let's go to Dean, and then Jeff, you back cleanup.
Great, Dave, thank you. So I'm going to let Dean take the detail on this, but the first thing I would say is, have you made an effort first to get your data cleaned up so that you've got quality data? And then the second one, have you been able to standardize on a small list of technologies? If you're able to clean up your data and you're able to standardize, then you're more likely to be ready for a digital environment and more ready to make that move. Part of the other thing I would say is, are your folks change hardy and resilient and ready to make that move as well? The technology is rarely the issue; it's usually the people, and you got to make sure that you're ready to lead a change as well.
Yeah, thank you, William. And yeah, I would look at it from the perspective of most x86 applications and technologies can be moved to the cloud. And the benefit is you can move at the pieces you need and the pace that you would like. What we would do typically, though, is we know customers' environments just aren't that simple, right? We would work with our customers and look to see what your environments look like and what makes most sense for you and your goals and time frames. As I mentioned before, the benefit of going with Oracle is that flexibility in what you need. But as far as your workload readiness, it turns out a lot of the times it's also just what your real goals are. When it comes to the business, when it comes to the business impact, if there's some impending event that pushes you faster, maybe it's aging hardware, maybe it's talent retirement, it could be any number of different things that would prompt that. When you're looking at your workloads, you'd also want to see what you can isolate. If they're similar to what William is saying, are there easier candidates to start with, especially if cloud is new to you? If you've got test and dev environments you want to start with, maybe you just start with DR and then add more, maybe backup, and you do some test and dev, and then work your way into training and reporting systems. That's a great way to do it. That way it gets people comfortable, you understand your costs, you get the baseline of the infrastructure going, and you feel good to go. I think that's the way to approach it. And what we see a lot of our customers doing, frankly, is similar to Jeff's experience, where they are moving test and dev, they're moving DR into the cloud, they're getting help to do it sometimes, and it's a good approach.
And William, let's back clean up with you. When did you feel like you guys were ready to move your workloads to the cloud? I'm sorry, Jeff, I'm sorry, got you mixed up. Yeah, Jeff, for you.
Well, when we realized we had to replace all the existing hardware that we had, that was the time we just had to make that decision. That's when we realized that was our time to move. And then again, with going with the hybrid, we didn't jump 100% into the cloud. We've still had our feet back in the on-prem solution, so it kind of gives us a little, comfort zone there. Test out the cloud, see if it works for us. Realized it did, and now we're ready to take that next step to move everything up there.
Okay, well, speaking of next steps, this next question is for you, Jeff, so hang on. So Margaret Wong, City of Huntsville, has a question for you, and she even puts a smiley face because apparently she likes you. So even though the Vikings aren't in the Super Bowl, but she goes, even if your organization moves everything to the cloud, you still need a DBA to manage the cloud or to manage the database server in cloud? ? She's saying, right? So does Oracle design the database tables for your organization too? So that gets back to that question. You said you avoided hiring a DBA, so I think this goes to the heart of that question. Do you still need one?
Well, we do, yes, but we use it as through Collier IT. They are our DBA, so they do all of our database management, patching, everything that's Oracle database related. Collier takes care of. So my team doesn't even have to deal with any of that.
Well, that's good. Like I said, your headaches have been reduced. Hey, we've got time for maybe one and a half questions, but I'm going to ask this next one here real quick because Dean, this and William, this for you, because a lot of times people say, yeah, I like it, and it got back to the previous question about, the service level agreements. So what are some of the SLAs, the service level agreements offered especially for mission critical workloads? So Dean or William, who wants to go first?
Sure, I'll take the start of this, and maybe William, you can correct me or add on to it. Oracle it follows suit from a lot of our competitors, a lot of the different cloud providers out there when it comes to availability, and that's the basic uptime. Where Oracle has our confidence in our Generation 2 infrastructure and our technologies is where we can expand upon that and get into the manageability and performance SLAs as well. So you have the confidence in your management capabilities and management functions to scale up and down as you need to, plus there's a performance around the network and storage performance in particular to make sure that it meets your SLAs for your organization. We're one of the only ones out there that actually put it in writing and agree to that for our customers. Yeah. William, anything else to add to that, or?
That's great. I would have said something similar. It's availability is sort of the cost of doing business.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey guys, we could keep going on, and folks out there, I apologize. We maybe went just like a minute over, but as you can see, we had so many questions to get to. We tried to get to them all, and I squeezed the last one in and got us over the finish line. But folks, hey, first of all, what we want to do today is we've got to thank our partner, which is Oracle. We cannot put on webinars like this without the partnership of Oracle. The other thing I want to do is I want to thank our speakers today. So we had Jeff Cummings, William Sanders, and Dean Irardi hopped on the line with us. We want to thank you guys for all of the work that you've done, and we want to thank you guys for joining us. But folks, thank you for joining us. We hope everybody has a great day. We hope to see you soon again on another government technology event. Everybody out there, have a great day.